Hello everyone. This video is intended to give those students who are going to be sitting a GCSE History exam on Thursday the 6th of June a very quick rundown on the historic environment question that will be on the Normans paper. This year it's going to be on Pevensey Castle. What we're going to try and do here is identify three key themes that we can look at when examining Pevensey Castle and identify the type of knowledge that we might use within that type of question. For this topic, we need to consider why castles were built by the Normans, and in particular, why was it that Pevensey Castle was built? In the September of 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, invaded, Pevensey Castle offered a natural harbour facing the Normandy coast, and control of it not only ensured lines of communication with the continent, back with Normandy, but it also meant that it could prevent Pevensey from being used as a base for another seaborne invasion. Now, this was a realistic concern that William, Duke of Normandy would have had, as he knew, for example, that Harold Hardrada had invaded up on the north coast only a few weeks previously. The Norman castle would prove to be an innovation. Brought to England by the Normans from France, their introduction in England would change the nature of warfare away from battles and instead focus on sieges. Although most of the Norman castles, like those at Pevensey and Hastings, were simply motte and bailey constructions, they dominated the English towns, protected scattered Norman garrisons, and made it much harder for resistance and rebellion to gain momentum. For William, it was natural and made good strategic sense that, after fortifying Pevensey and Hastings, more castles were built as he proceeded to London after his victory over Harold. Between 1068 and 69, as William travelled across England, castles were constructed as far apart as Exeter and York, with many in between. These were primitive castles, and they would not provide a permanent advantage and would need rebuilding in stone. And although not all of them would be needed in the future, they were vital assets in the decade after the conquest. Norman castles changed the landscape of England after the conquest. The motte and bailey castle was a new design, and William was soon building the first stone keeps in England, such as the White Tower that astonished Londoners. These castles became lasting symbols of Norman authority to a hostile and restless native population, who saw the new royal castles dominate the urban landscape and project William's power. The result of so much castle building was that England was now fortified to a much greater extent. Having conquered England, William made it harder for other foreign invaders to repeat the Norman success, because they would now be faced with fortified towns, residences, and larger castles. Pevensey in particular played a crucial role in the Norman invasion of 1066 because it provided a defensible site. After landing, William immediately built a temporary timber fortification, almost certainly within the walls of the Roman fort, to shelter his troops. It's likely that it took him less than a day to build this fort from pre-cut and prepared components that he brought with him in the invasion fleet. William ordered a ditch cut across the peninsula to isolate the ruins from the mainland and repaired the Roman walls. The Roman tower in the northwest corner of the new Inner Bailey was raised in height to provide an observation point, as the Normans might have feared a counterattack from the north. The advantage of building motte and bailey castles, just as at Pevensey, is that they were relatively simple to build, needing only the movement of the earth and rough carpentry, which could be obtained from the surrounding population. And therefore, the local people, the Anglo-Saxons themselves, would have been forced to build the means of their own domination by the Normans. There were probably over 1,000 castles built in the period between 1066 and 1100. William I eventually died in 1087, Upon his death, William divided his land. His eldest son, Robert Curthose, got Normandy, William Rufus received England, and Henry got £5,000. William also released political prisoners such as his half-brother Odo, who was also the Bishop of Bayeux, Earl of Kent and Lord of Rochester Castle. Quite a powerful and serious individual. Odo formed a rebellion to remove William Rufus from the throne and replace him with Robert Curthose. The rebellion happened in several places over England, but Pevensey was in real danger as it was held by Robert of Mortain, also Odo's half-brother. William Rufus spent 6 weeks besieging Pevensey Castle from land and sea, eventually taking control in 1088 when the rebels ran out of food. Despite this, Robert of Mortain was allowed to keep Pevensey. Castles were one feature used to suppress rebellions after 1066. In 1068, he faced a rebellion by the Northumbrian earls in support of Edgar Atheling, the last surviving member of Edward the Confessor's House of Wessex. Castles were built in Exeter, Warwick, Nottingham and York. Just as with Pevensey, this underlines the importance that castles were given by William, Duke of Normandy. He recognised that in order to control the country, he needed these castles to be spread out to ensure that his rule would be maintained. The final theme to consider is that of economy and administration, and the importance that castles gave the Normans in terms of running a local area in the years after 1066. Castles were important in terms of maintaining law and order, putting down rebellions, but once rebellions had been suppressed, it was important to be able to run the local area efficiently and make a profit from it. Pevensey Castle sat in one of the 6 Sussex rapes that would now be held by William's trusted supporters. They provided a safe and secure route to Normandy for supplies and, had it been necessary in the months after the Battle of Hastings, for retreat as well. In the years that followed, this route was important because William and his nobles held land in both England and Normandy that they needed to be able to govern. By 1073, this area of the Sussex coast had been divided into 5 rapes, each one owned by a trusted follower or relative of the conqueror. In 1067, King William sailed from Pevensey to make a triumphal tour of Normandy. It was then that he gave Pevensey Castle, with its surrounding land, to his half-brother Robert, Count of Mortain. It was probably Robert who created the first permanent defences, refortifying the Roman outer wall and creating 2 enclosures or baileys within it, divided by a ditch and a timber palisade. So, who was Robert of Mortain? He was typical of the men who received these key positions from the king. They had one thing in common: they were all Normans. As there were non-Norman soldiers in William's army at Hastings, the choice of only Normans for these lordships in southeast England must be seen as deliberate. In fact, they were well fitted to occupy these strategically important positions in England, as they already held similar positions in Normandy, with Robert of Mortain, for example, holding lands on the southern frontier in Normandy. Also important was the fact that several of this group, including Robert, were related to the king. Robert was one of the wealthiest lords in post-conquest England. As well as holding the important rape of Pevensey, he had land in 20 counties, with particularly extensive estates in Northamptonshire, Yorkshire and the southwest. Well, this clearly demonstrates the trust William had in Robert, yet it also shows us that William was careful to ensure that the land key individuals controlled was spread out across the country rather than being based in one area. Ironically, despite these precautions, Robert still sided against William Rufus in 1087. The king's allocation of land was only the first step in the Normans' land settlement, as lords such as Robert began organising their own administrations within their territories. They exploited their position to the utmost, exacting rents from others higher than from their own manors. Robert increased the number of burgesses, freemen of the town, from 24 to 60. In 1066, Edward the Confessor had received £1 per year from them in tax. By 1086, Robert was receiving £3 per year from each one of them. Robert also received £1 per year from the town mill. The 24 salt works are recorded on Robert's coastal manors, and together they brought him over £5 per year. Robert gave large gifts of land to a Benedictine monastery in Normandy, along with houses, pannage and pasture rights in Pevensey Forest. Eventually, most English county towns had a castle, which served as an administrative centre, a storeroom and a jail. Overall then, it's highly likely in the exam on Thursday that you will have to look at 3 particular themes when it comes to castles. Firstly, you want to consider, why was Pevensey Castle built in 1066? What prompted its construction in that location at that time? And obviously much of that will come back to the idea of the invasion, pre-Battle of Hastings, and how William needed a secure base from which he could fight against Harold Godwinson. Secondly, you might consider, what did castles allow the Normans to do in the years after 1066? How did it allow them to control local areas through terror, through dominating the local countryside? And thirdly, you will want to look at how castles allowed the Normans to administer the local area and make a profit from the local people. And therefore for this, for Pevensey, you want to be able to talk about the salt works, the burgesses and the use of taxation by Robert of Mortain. Very best of luck, ladies and gents.